Hey, I'm Sarah Inman, and I'm excited to be here with you and be a part of this conversation and 6 conversations that we're going to be a part of, just listening to people and learning from them. I'm with an organization for Evansville, and really we are just trying to help people not just be in the city of Evansville, but be for Evansville. And one of the ways that we do that is we want to pursue human flourishing, the good of the city through the church. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is one, listening to stories. We're storytellers. We have a lot of opportunity to listen to people through our own podcast and a lot of other ways that we've been able to tell stories over the years. But also, we know that some of the avenues and pathways that are happening in our city, we want to celebrate and connect more people to those. And one of those is neighborhood revitalization. Austin, what is this Love Your Neighborhood conversation that we're jumping into?
Yes, and my name is Austin Maxheimer, and I am the Neighborhood Revitalization Director for Community One, who we oversee Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and then coach other neighborhood-based organizations in that. And probably the simplest way that we explain that is that we want to our organization wants to help neighbors love neighbors. And we do that through neighborhood revitalization because neighborhoods are just full of neighbors. And so there's some areas in our cities and our communities that have experienced difficulties or barriers to flourishing, as Sarah said. And we believe that those neighborhoods or areas of our town are full of amazing neighbors that can be the change they want to see. And that's the heart of Love Your Neighborhood initiative. But the work itself is not widespread or well done, this idea of assets-based community development. And so we've been practicing it and failing and learning and growing for a few years now in the work. And so we thought it was time to kind of collect up all the practitioners in the ground who have been doing Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and learning from them. So you're going to hear stories, you're going to hear best practices, you're going to hear learnings. But these are people that are in the work, doing it every day in and day out. And we thought we could create a community of learners. And so we're inviting you as potential neighborhood-based organizations that are interested in the Love Your Neighborhood initiative to sit back and learn and grow and contribute your own voice to this. And so that's what these 6 sessions are all about. And we look forward to you guys interacting with us and learning and being co-conspirators in this great idea of creating flourishing neighborhoods. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in and learn from a neighborhood. Well, welcome to this session of Love Your Neighborhood, where we are looking at practitioners on the ground, looking to resource you by talking to other practitioners. And this episode has a special place in my heart because the neighborhood that we will be talking about is the East End in Henderson, and it is where I actually cut my teeth in neighborhood work. Many years ago, it was the first time that I ever stepped into a neighborhood in order to talked with residents, and it completely transformed how I understand and look at how we serve people that are experiencing poverty and how we engage with that in our own walk and work day to day. And so I'm excited to share the story of the East End and to talk about his neighborhood, but I'm also excited that we are here with Tammy Sutton and Nivea Carter. Tammy is like my longest friend in neighborhood work. I got a picture of you and I sitting actually over here in Jacobsville neighborhood from 2012 when we're getting ready to do door knocking in that neighborhood. And Nivea is my newest friend in neighborhood work. She started working in the East End just at the beginning of this year. And so longest friend, newest friend in the neighborhood where I got started in. So we are excited to get underway. And we're going to jump right in, if that's all right. And we're going to start with just tell us about the East End. Tell us about your neighborhood. If we are going to love our neighborhood, then we have to know our neighborhood. And so just give us an introduction to the East End.
So, well, I've been on the East End for a while now. I feel like that's my home, that's my family. And I've worked there since 2015. And the East End has a lot of very vibrant people there. There's a lot of people that want to do entrepreneurship. There's a lot of people that would like to have their own businesses. There are a lot of people that are self-starters there. And so it's also 40% children. And so we have a lot of kids in our area. So we see a lot of special opportunities that we have on the East End of Henderson.
And my relationship with the East End started as a little girl, I actually lived down the street from Audubon Kids Zone when I was in kindergarten through like second grade. And I also my grandmother lived on a street called Julia Street, which the home is still there. It's a family house. My cousin lives there right now. And I have a few aunts and cousins that live on the same street. My brother lives in the area as well. So, and my uncle. So, like, I have a lot of family that still lives on the east end side of Henderson. And it's just a blessing to be able to come back to an area where I started from, where I'm rooted. So,
what would you say is the larger city of Henderson's kind of perception or narrative of the East End? Good and bad.
I think, unfortunately, the East End gets kind of a bad rap. I think a lot of people think of the East End as a place that you either don't want to be or you don't want your kids to be. We do have a high crime rate and we do have a high level of poverty there, but that doesn't mean that the people that are there are necessarily they're very genuine people and they're very caring about their neighborhood. And so we would like to be able to get that image out and that culture changed as far as the perception of Henderson and the rest of Henderson.
It's historically, I've heard, it seems like half of Henderson grew up in the East End. So it's a really interesting neighborhood where there's a fondness of the memory, even if the current state isn't what they typically would like to see now. It's an interesting perspective. So, all right, let's talk about the neighborhood work specifically. So, Nivea, you have been at it for a whopping 4 months.
Yes.
And so a lot of our potential people that would be listening are maybe even less experienced than you in the work, so you're actually way ahead of them in leading them. But I think you offer a great perspective that would be very helpful for a practitioner on the ground because you're in the midst of learning in real time what it looks like. And so what has been kind of your biggest... Oh, let's start here. What motivated you to do the work in the first place?
Oh, goodness. Well, what motivated me to do this work was an opportunity presented to me. And once the opportunity was presented to me, I knew from a spiritual standpoint that it was just a calling that I was set to do anyways. And so I didn't hesitate to walk into the assignment. I went into it not really knowing what the path that was already laid out for me to do. But I went and I just went in with confidence. And I was just blessed to be able to have great coaches as yourself and Miss Tammy to reassure me along the way that, everything was going to be fine. So, okay.
And Tammy, you, both of you have a very interesting background. Neither one of you have the traditional pathway to community development work. Nivea being a spouse, a military homemaker or a homemaker in the military. I don't know if I said that correctly, and then Tammy being an accountant, social worker. Tammy, just asking, what was your journey from moving from, an accountant, doing books and those things, and then to social work, then deciding to root into neighborhood work, neighborhood revitalization?
So I did accounting for 25 years. I was a CPA, a bean counter, that kind of traditional person. I went to work as a finance person at Daughters of Charity. And when I worked at Daughters of Charity, I got immersed in systemic change. And that made me want to change, go back to USI and get my MSW. And I've been working in social work and neighborhoods and kids ever since then.
And how do you think that your backgrounds have uniquely prepared you for this, for your roles that you're currently doing?
Okay. With myself, coming from a military background, I was a military spouse for over 13 years, and just being in contact with just different soldiers, from single soldiers to different other military spouses, and being on a military base with lower to higher ranked soldiers, I just feel like and that was, we were in our own little community, and just the day-to-day walk with different people who are diverse as far as like religion and the different walks of background that they came from. I just feel like it prepared me for this. Well, it groomed me for this because it's kind of like a similar, just a similar work that I was put into. So.
And Tammy spent a year overseas, starting a street kids school, if I'm saying that correctly. Yes. That feels like that uniquely prepared you as well for this work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, in between becoming an accountant and transferring to being a social worker, I got to spend a year in Afghanistan and worked on the ground with street kids with people that were native Afghans there. And so we worked with kids by visiting homes. We visited with the kids at school. We got to know the parents, and it all had to do with relationship building. And I felt like that was a huge start. Relationship building, finding what the strengths were, finding what the needs were, finding where we could fit in and provide resources or send them for resourcing, whether it be medical to hospitals or whether it be food that they needed or whatever the need was. And so it really kind of laid the pathway for what we're doing now in the East End.
Mm. So I'm hearing some of your stories, and I know some of yours, Tammy, and hearing yours for the first time, Nivea. But was there a point where that shifted, where you're like, I want to be connected more to what's happening directly in this community, maybe the place that you're living in, and the space that you see, the city you're in? Was there a point where something shifted there, where you're like, this is something I'm really interested in?
I think for me, because before I came here, I was working at elementary school, and I seen how, like, day to day, how teachers were like overwhelmed with like certain behaviors from like certain children. And I know personally, I experienced an outbreak with a little boy who was just not an outbreak, but just a little boy. He was having a tantrum, and a lot of the teachers didn't really know how to handle him. And just from that mother standpoint, I think I just seen like how teachers were like drained every day. And so I took it upon myself to kind of like, to talk to some of the teachers and ask them, personally, like, hey, do you know what's going on at home? And I just feel like, a lot of the issues that the kids had in school was related to like home issues, and so that opened my eyes to like wanting to like connect more with the families, and just going into like the neighborhoods from where I came from, because there was a lot of people, a lot of kids who didn't have like mothers or fathers, figures growing up, and I knew that I had a gift to share with other people.
Mine actually started, Austin's already mentioned it. It started about the same time that I went to Daughters of Charity. Austin and a group of us started a thing called Engage Henderson. And so in Engage Henderson, we looked at a lot of ways to be able, could we best be the church and serve community, but it'd be very relational. It'd be something that we could do, that we met people where they were. And so I think that is what started a lot of what my really true interest in that. I'm a very relational person, and so I love building relationship, hearing other people's stories, that type of thing. I went into therapy, and I still do therapy, but the whole pride of what I do, I believe, is being able to be involved in the community and knowing the community and claiming it as our community.
Yeah. And so just for the record, we have an accountant, a homemaker, and a minister, and we are doing neighborhood revitalization work. So I think the important thing for the listeners is you do not have to be, certainly community development degree and urban planning would be helpful, but really it's the heart and the calling and the willingness to step into the work. So just know that you are equipped to do the work. So the East End currently, as Tammy said, the neighborhood had an initiative that started over a decade ago now, where we were doing original listening, but then things kind of stalled out after some quick wins. But just over the last couple of years, we've re-engaged the community specifically the neighbors, and the Audubon Kids Zone has become the backbone organization or the lead agency in the neighborhood work. So we've went through the first year of listening and engaging residents. We want to just listen for a full first year, but now we are into the second year. We've just published the quality of life plan, the neighbors' vision for change. So just tell me what's going on right now in the neighborhood work. What are you actively working on? What kind of things are happening? We did listening. Now we've got the plan. So what are we doing right now, day to day in the neighborhood?
Well, right now, we just had our first Love Your Neighborhood, not association meeting, but meeting this week, and it turned out to be an amazing day. Like, we had numbers, a lot of people that came out to support, and residents that had concerns and wanted to state their opinions about what's going on in their neighborhood. And we had a good feedback, and it was just like a good fellowship, good celebration, almost, so to speak. And so we're planning our next one for next month, and we're just hoping to double the numbers. That's my goal, is to double the numbers, and just basically just to see what ideas that the residents want to bring to the neighborhood. That's
good. And you had almost 40 people there.
Yes, almost 40 people.
Wow.
Which is just really remarkable. Like, we've been at it for 5 years, and we don't have 40 people come to our meetings, so well done. What other kind of things are you working on in the neighborhood?
Well, we've got our neighborhood action plans that Nivea is in charge of, and so that allows the neighbors to do from $250 to $1,000 to be able to invest in their own neighborhood, the changes they'd like to see. I feel like that we are pulling leaders together from our neighborhood to be able to lead some of the projects that Austin referred to on our brochure that talks about what the neighbors want to see done in their neighborhood, whether it be we wanted senior neighbors that wanted to see a community bingo and a park there. We had a lot of neighbors that wanted to see more things for kids to do. And so neighbors are finding out where they fit in, and they're kind of plugging into the areas where they can make change. And I think a third thing that has been a big difference is the city is actually joining in with us, and we have people on all of their committees for the East End improvement plan that they have there too. So I feel like it's not just Audubon Kids Zone and not just Love Your Neighbor right now. We've got a lot more people involved in that.
Yeah, it's great.
Right.
Yeah.
On the meeting that you guys had, how'd you get that information out to neighbors?
Well, on Earth Day, we had Love Your Neighbor Day that we rolled out as well, and we gave out flowers to the residents of the East End community, and we attached just a little flyer to the flyers, and also we have a social media outlets, and I shared information, and I personally know a lot of people from the East End community, so I verbally reached out to people.
Yeah. A lot of relationship.
Right. Yeah. So that's how we kind of like got the word out. And I think they told other people, and it just spread.
That's one of those things. It's like we tell people, like, we hope that's what happens. And when you actually see it happen, you're like,
Yes.
oh, it can work that way. Because
Right.
most of the time it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I just want to pause and just sit on that for a second, though, because it's really important as you are thinking about communicating with neighbors. It really is an by all means necessary approach.
Right.
That's why we talk about building a communication infrastructure for the neighborhood initiative, because some people will only do through text messages. You have to email, Facebook, social media. But then really the tried and true method in all neighborhoods that we found is the word of mouth, the personal invitation, getting neighbors, not only having the neighborhood champion, the person on the ground doing the invitation, but having neighbors themselves invite others to the neighborhood. That's when you can really see momentum happening. So, Tammy, I know early on in the neighborhood work, when you were really shifting to, sort of full-time Kids Zone. I know you got 2 jobs now, right? You did a lot of door-to-door, house-to-house approach. What did you learn from that?
I think, number one, I learned how important it is to really listen to people, not just ask questions for the sake of asking questions, but listening to what's behind that answer, listening to what's in their hearts, listening to what people really want for themselves and their children and the future of Henderson and the East End of Henderson. So I feel like that was a big part of it, is just learning to listen and find out what it is that they desired.
How did you get people to open the door?
We offered things to them that they could have. So we bribed them.
Incentives.
Incentives. Yes, I like that word. It's incentives. We offered incentives. But really, if they're going to be giving of their time and being willing to invest and talk to someone about that, their time is deserving of something that's an incentive too. So when we approach it that way, I think people see things a little differently and they feel like they are valued and they do have something to contribute that's important.
That's great. All right, Nivea, we're going to put you on the hot seat for a while. As I said, I believe you have a unique expression or a unique opportunity in where you're at in the work to really help people that are stepping into the work for the first time. You know, it's fresh to you still.
Yes.
So just going to ask some general questions, and then maybe my friend Sarah can help me out, get more concrete and specific. So just what are you learning in the moment of now, and what have you learned the last 4 months, especially in the context of engaging residents?
I've learned that, like you said before, I think just building personal relationships, you know, with each individual, I think is important because everybody wants to feel special, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and I think just extending that invitation to, you know, just conversation or a cup of coffee or lunch, you know, just to see how a person is doing for the day, you know, I feel like it just draws a person in. Not trying to like bribe them or anything, but it's just building relationships. Because yes, I am from Henderson, and yes, I grew up in the East End when I was younger, but I moved away, and a lot of people don't know me. So coming back into a neighborhood, a lot of people are. I mean, I know they're probably curious as to who I am, you know, and you know, I just want my main thing is to allow people to know that I don't have any motives, and I'm genuine, and I truly want to see the East End of Henderson flourish, so that one day, you know, the community can flourish on its own, and that's the whole goal, is for us to kind of like take our hands off it one day, and then, you know, the people of the East End can use their gifts and talents to kind of like build up and just allow it to, you know, produce on its own. Yeah.
So what challenges are you facing? What's been your biggest frustration so far?
I feel like my biggest frustration is the miscommunication as to the type of work that I do, and the importance of my job, because a lot of I'm not gonna say everybody, but some people aren't like on board with the LYN neighborhood champion, but I feel like my role is very important because I think you had mentioned once before personnel and boots on the ground. You know, if nobody's on the ground doing the work, I mean, who's out there to initiate, you know, what's going on and engage with the residents? And going back to my military background, you know, that's why we have soldiers. We have soldiers that are on the ground doing work. We have soldiers that are in the sky doing the work. We have soldiers that are on the water doing the work, you know. So, like, you know, as it relates to the civilian part of life, we need that engagement. We need to have people on the ground doing the work, and not just myself, but once I engage with other residents, then those residents that have been there for 40 and 50 years will also see the vision that they want to see for their neighborhood, and they will start to, you know, be this quote unquote champions of their neighborhood. Yeah. That's the goal. Yeah. You know, they'll eventually be their own champions because they will, because I feel like the foundation's already been laid. It just at this point right now, it's been almost like just abandoned, so to speak, because a lot of people's been complaining about like what the East End used to be like, but now we know that it'll never get back to what it used to be. But right now, we are planning to work towards, you know, the future, and that's pretty much it.
I have a question that came up as you're thinking about you being in this work for 4 months, and again, Austin talking about, you know, you have a really unique perspective. So thinking of even 5 months ago, wherever you lived, whether it was Henderson or another city, if someone came to your door and knocked on your door and said something to you, what would your thought have been? And how has that shifted after being in the work for the past 4 months?
I think I would be a little bit more open, because I'm just like I'm not one to like shun anybody out. You know, I'll listen, if anything, because I'm a listener. Like I just listen and observe. So if anybody knocked on my door and was expressing themselves about, you know, the work of the East End community, I would just pretty much just listen on what they had to say and just go from there.
That's great.
So one more hot seat question, and we'll give you a break. If Nivea in May 2023 could go back and coach Nivea of January 2023,
hello,
what would you tell yourself?
I would say, girl, no.
Run.
No, I would literally tell myself that it gets better each day. Like, you know, because I'm not gonna lie, like at some point I was sitting there talking to myself, like literally, like, what in God, what have you done? Like, what am I doing? You know, I'm not saying that I wasn't called to do the job or trying to, I just didn't know, because like this work is just really, to be honest, is like unpredictable, like in a good way. But it gets better day by day. It gets better day by day. But I feel like you have to build the momentum, and I jumped the hurdles and then cleared it, and then went on to the next task and jumped the next one and cleared it, you know. But I would tell myself, you know, to keep going and don't give up, because it's people who really are dependent on me to come through as a neighborhood coordinator, neighborhood champion.
And celebrating the wins you're talking about, of having 40 people show up, like taking enough space to celebrate, like this is a good thing, and you're seeing momentum happen. So even just as I've heard in the time we spent together here, like I hear that like your wins are happening. So giving yourself the space to celebrate those is probably really important too.
Right. And see, I didn't even know, like, because I'm new to it. So when everybody was like 40, I'm like, you know, because I mean, it was good. Yeah. So I didn't know what to expect, but everybody else did that's been in this work before me. So, you know, I'm just celebrating with them. I'm like, okay, 40, we're going to go for 80, and then maybe 180 or 140, whatever. I don't know. But, you know, regardless of the numbers, you know, because they can change.
Sure.
Because it could be 40 this meeting and then 4 next meeting. But regardless of the numbers that show up, we're still going to push the same initiative. We're going to still go out there and just give our best and do our best, and just to be there for our residents, be the voices for our residents.
Yeah, it was an early learning of community mobilization for me to value the people that do show up, even if it's low numbers, because it can be discouraging when you're leading a thing and you have expectations that you bring to it. But then when the people show up, if you project those expectations onto them, then they feel valued in the moment, and they took time out of their life to show up. So I love that you said that, and you're coming with that knowing that, hey, even if 4 people come, 4 people can make a big impact.
Right.
And to invest in them is very important. So Tammy, 4 months, let's talk about 11 years. If you could go back and talk to the young whippersnapper, Tammy Sutton, who was just a volunteer. You know, you and I were just volunteers. We were just having fun, learning about neighborhood work by practicing it. What would you tell Tammy Sutton circa 2012 or 11?
I think the biggest thing I would tell myself is have patience. It takes time, because I'm not a very patient person, and I'd like things to happen boom, 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 boom. And so I think to realize how important it is to build those relationships and build them solidly doesn't happen overnight, doesn't happen in 6 months. I mean, we're going on 5-6 years in the community right now, and we're still working on, we've built trust, but we're still working on building that trust. So I really think that would be the big lesson for me, is to learn it's not going to happen overnight. We have to take time and do it right.
Yeah, that's really good, really important. That's why we talk about if you're neighborhood-based organization interested in lead agency work, we ask that you seriously consider a 10-year commitment to the neighborhood. And I don't think there's any magic in 10 years, but it's just that's a commitment. That's a significant. That's a decade. And yeah.
I have a question then. So thinking about 11 years, let's just be honest and raw about it. Is there points where you thought I shouldn't do this anymore? Like this is too much, or this is not something, like, is there a point where you thought about that?
I think during COVID, because things shifted so much, I thought, are things ever going to get back to the way they were? And are we going to be able to build relationships? So I did have that concern during COVID, but I always believed in the work we were doing and that eventually it was going to come out, that eventually, things were going to work out.
Yeah. I think that's just one of those things that, letting people know that you might have those thoughts that pop into your mind, and figuring out like who are the community of people, as you're sitting here and talking about you guys learning together for the past 11 years, like you still have people to connect with and really continue to talk about.
Yes. Okay. It's story time. So, I want you guys, both to share a story, especially in so much as the story can bring, kind of the underlying concepts and ideas of neighborhood revitalization to life. Now, I know that might be a little difficult for you. Nivea just getting started might not have as many stories at hand, but I'm certain that you have at least one good one because I've heard them. So yeah, you can pick who goes first. Just if you could each just share a story that brings Love Your Neighbor to life, that'd be great.
I'll go first. So this, it really is not tied into like the East End or anything, but it's just a story that I feel like that allowed me to have the compassion for what I do. So it was a guy, it was actually my ex-husband's soldier, and he was an atheist. And so I just, I'm a Christian, and I was just like, at one point I was like, I didn't want him in my house. I didn't. And I was like, because he was just the way he spoke, and I had children. So I had all this stuff in my mind, like, as to why I didn't want this man in my house. And so, and we were in Germany, and it was Thanksgiving. And so, and he didn't have any family over there, and he didn't have anywhere to eat. And so my husband was talking about this man, and he was like, such and such is, he doesn't have any family. And I just like, I didn't say anything, but I was just like, in my mind, I'm like, I said I wasn't, I said what I wouldn't do, And so, and then the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, invite him over for dinner. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I invited him over for dinner. He came over, he ate. He was so quiet, and he ate. And then I even told him, I was like, before he left, I said, please, fix you up some plates you can take home with you. And then at the end, he's like, ma'am, I know I didn't say much. He said, but I truly thank you for this meal. And he said, because, I don't have any family here. And he just went on and on and on. And I tell that story because, even after he left, we don't know the impact that we may have on a person. And even though, like, he quote unquote said that he, wasn't a believer, which at the time I felt like it was not so my right to like fix him, but I just said like what I wouldn't allow into my home. But at the end of the day, just opening up my heart and receiving him into my home and to feeding him allowed me to just have it had a different perspective on myself. And then going into the neighborhood work where I'm going to meet atheists, I'm going to meet people who are just are not aligned the same way that I'm aligned, which is okay, and that was probably 12 years ago, and I'm totally different, from 12 years ago. But it allowed me to truly just look at things differently and look at people differently. And if we approach people with a mindset of just open arms and not worrying about like who they are and what they believe in the moment, I feel like we can reach people more that way, just doing neighborhood work. And I feel like just going into this, I have come across some people who are different, and And even though they were, maybe been hesitant to receive me, I was still open to receive them, in conversation or what have you.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Tammy?
So I think the best example of a story I have is everything's now pre-COVID and post-COVID now.
Yeah.
So pre-COVID, when we first started AKZ, there were a couple of kids we had. One was a pre-kindergartner and one was a kindergartner. And they came to AKZ, and I asked Mom beforehand if I could tell the story. And she said, yes, that's fine. So we a lot of things we like to do at AKZ was we like to do home visits. We like to visit with the kids, but we never were really able to do home visits with these two kids. They didn't want people in their homes. They didn't want people knocking on their doors. Mom didn't want people around. She was very careful about things. And so COVID came. And when COVID came, we had food trucks food baskets that we could deliver. And a lot of people didn't have food, and this family didn't have a place that they could work at the time. So we started delivering the food baskets and got to know this lady, and her name was Catherine. And so as we got to know Catherine more and more, she started inviting us. We could go to a collection she had in the garage. She invited us in the house to come see things and all that. And she invited us to her backyard. And it turned out that this lady, we call it the Garden of Eden that she had in her backyard. She had five or six different kind of fruit trees. She had every kind of vegetable you can imagine. Her whole backyard was just a garden of all kinds of food that she was providing to people too during COVID to do. And we found out that was her passion. So all of a sudden, we had a door. And so now Catherine today is our community resource expert at AKZ. She comes in and does the community garden. She works on the community team with Nivea. And she is not only running our community garden, she's helping other families in the neighborhood run their community gardens. So we just love that we were able to have, to talk to her and get to listen to her enough to find out what her passions were. And she admits, she said, I've grown so much since doing this. She said, I feel like I'm comfortable. I feel like this is my safe spot that I can do, and I feel like I can talk to people and bring something of value to them where before I didn't feel like I had that much value.
Wow.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's such a good illustration of the work. Going to where people are, finding the existing assets that are already there, activating them deeper, and then watching them grow and expand their network and influence in the community. It's just like, that's it. That's a good one. And I wish I could say we could wrap on that good story, but usually you're supposed to do practical things and then emotional stories, right? But I want to make sure that we leave, because again, we're talking to practitioners here. So maybe I'd like to close with a couple things that are really super practical that help you execute your work. And since I didn't preload you with this question, I'll go first, just give you an example. It's really simple things. So early on in our initiative, we knew we were meeting a lot of residents, but we didn't have their names. We didn't have their contact information. We couldn't prove to anyone that we were actually meeting neighbors, right? And so when in 2019, after we had been doing the neighborhood work for 2 years, we said, okay, we want to keep residents at the center of our work, and we want to prove to others outside the community that residents are the center of the work. So we're just going to open up a Google Sheet. I was just creating the simplest thing that I knew how to use, and I started putting neighbors in that I met by name and had a conversation with them into the Google Sheet, collecting their names and what they're interested in and their contact information. And that became what is the Love Your Neighborhood Resident Engagement Database that now is the center of measurement for our work. But that was just a super practical thing that helped me execute the work, right? So as you think about your day-to-day work, what are just some very practical things and tips and learnings that you can give other practitioners about that'll be helpful for them?
I would say, first of all, try as best you can to remember people's names, because people like to be recognized by their names. That's really important. So try to recognize their names and try to remember something important about them. So like with Catherine and the gardening, or we have, another lady who's really interested in sewing, or if we have somebody that's very interested in having her front porch and making it look really nice. Like, remember things that are important about people and try to apply that every time you talk to them, so they realize they're not just another neighbor, they're not just another person out there, but that they really mean something to you.
And I would say just to see like what you have in common, like some things that you have in common. because it could be, I don't know, because a lot of people make relationships that way too. And some people may receive you or may not receive you because of certain situations or things, but if you can find some type of relatable thing, you know, and I'm like, oh, she does that, I do that too, you know. So I say that. Of course, I haven't been doing it for that long, but just in general, I just feel like that's a good way to kind of like build that relationship.
Yeah, relationship and trust. Okay, any parting comments? If you're talking to someone who's on day one of a Love Your Neighborhood initiative, what would be your parting thoughts to them?
Oh goodness, I would say, goodness, Austin.
I feel like
Let me give you a minute to talk.
It's one of those where it's like it feels like it's a lot of pressure, but I think what's great is you're saying like I don't know necessarily. Like I'm still trying. I think that's important to be able to say
true.
too. Like, so whatever is honest in that moment, I think it's gonna be really helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, it is. Because day one for me was like, do I read a book? Do I watch a video?
Yeah.
Do I do a dance? No, I'm joking. But
yes to all of the above.
Yeah, but I mean, day one is just as important as day 100, you know. So like you said before, just, you know, go in, lace your boots up, and, you know, just go in with a positive mindset. And that day one is not going to be like day two, and day two is not going to be like day 22. So just stay positive through it all, and you'll do good.
It's really good.
I think a lot of things we talk about at AKZ and LYN too are check your ego at the door. This is not about us personally. This is not about relationships or differences or barriers we have with other people. This is truly important work that is going to change the face of the community we're in. Mm-hmm. And so stick to it. Remember what your real purpose is there. Remember why you're really there, and keep targeting toward that goal that you have of the neighborhood restoration too, because that's what you're really working toward.
That's so good. Well, thank you guys for loving the East End, and thank you for listening and helping get just a little bit better in implementing this work in your neighborhood.